Hello, and welcome to Flat Files. My name is Kyle. This is my partner, Chrissy. This is an artist interview podcast series where we chit-chat with another artist and we talk about, a whole multitude of things. And in this week's episode,
we talk with the co-author of Artwork, a wonderful book filled with so much useful information for artists. We're speaking with Heather Bhandari. She is a writer, a curator, an educator, just all sorts of things. There's so much good information in here. If you're interested in publishing a book, talking about professional practice in the art world, talking about artists and money, and how we look at money in relation to art and value in relation to art, or even galleries and working in the commercial art scene, this is definitely the podcast for you. If you know other people that are really interested in learning more about professional practices in the arts, please share this video. It is packed full of wonderful information. We also did a book club on the Artwork book, and I'll share a link to that below. So if you want to check that out, you can go ahead and click that and learn more about what Kyle and I got from this book when we did our book club meeting. Otherwise, please enjoy the episode.
Okay. Hi, everybody. Hi, Chrissy and Kyle. I am Heather Bhandari, and I'm glad to be here today. I'm an independent curator. I'm the author of the book Artwork, and I wear a lot of different hats, actually. Yep, there we go. I also am the co-founder of something called Art World Learning, which is a business and financial health education platform for artists and designers and cultural producers. And I've done a lot of other things in my life, including working in for-profit and nonprofit galleries. So we can talk about any and all of that.
I know, I feel like it's one of those situations where I'm like, we're going to need to have you come back because you really do cover so much ground in what you do. And especially for like the folks that we talk to a lot, it is like all the things that they wish they understood more. So we're really so happy to have you here chatting with us. I had a great time reading your book. I will say that these books can be very dry and unpleasant to get through. And I know that you co-authored this with someone.
Yes.
So
yeah,
I don't know exactly how that was divided up, and maybe we can get into how that worked. But I did read it cover to cover, even though it is explicitly stated at the onset of the book not to do that. But because it was filled with there was humor in there. I felt like there was also things that I feel like sometimes we get nervous saying, like the hard truths about the art world, that for me made going cover to cover actually enjoyable, because it wasn't just this dry, like, and now you're going to make a resume and here are the things in your resume and this is what you need to say in your resume. It was just like quite funny and charming and very enjoyable to read cover to cover.
That makes me happy.
Yeah.
Thanks. I never thought anyone would actually read it cover to cover. It's surprising to hear that. Thank you.
Thank you. It has so much information. It was packed full. I did want to go through and like make a bunch of Canadian versions of things.
Yes.
I think that was my biggest, like, man.
I would love to hear like what you guys thought were what parts stood out to you as being so different, being from an American perspective. And it's funny that it is packed full of stuff. And there's so much we left out. So it's kind of like there's so much that could be in there, and trying to boil it down. I think that was one of the hardest parts of it, was trying to like boil it down to something that was manageable and wasn't extraordinarily boring. And we could talk about the relationship between me and Jonathan Melber, who we wrote it together. He is a lawyer and a business development person. He's actually not in the fine art world anymore. But at the time when we first started working together, he was volunteering for Volunteer Lawyers for the Arts. So he was working with artists through that. And so that's how we started talking, because I would ask him a lot of questions and be like, why did this happen? And why did that happen? And he's like, why don't you guys treat each other like adults? Why do gallery people treat artists like babies? Like, you're infantilizing artists. And so we would have all this back and forth. And my background was getting an MFA. So I was very sensitive to all of that too. And I was like, no, I am not infantilizing artists. And I would get like very upset. And so then we decided to like, how can we make this information transparent so that artists got more information? So that's how the book came about. And when you're talking about like how much information there was, so I'm super wordy. You're going to find that out right now. I'm really wordy. He's a great editor. So, and he was tangentially related to a lot of this stuff, or he saw stuff only when things went bad. And I could see the whole process of it getting bad. so, so we were able to like backtrack certain things and be like, oh, when could that have gone right? And it would be like, oh, almost always it was, well, if they had written that down, or if they communicated effectively, or if they had just treated each other like adults, or known this was a business, then they would have thought about that differently. So we would talk through all this stuff, and then I would write enormously long, wordy things. And it would be like, I would write, like, let's say it was about residencies. I just watched your thing on residencies, which was great, by the way. But it's like I would write something about residencies that was like 25 pages long, and then he would make it 3 pages, and I would be like, you cut out everything good. Everything good is gone now, and now all the important information is gone. So I would make it back to 10 pages, and then he would pull it back down to 7 pages, and then like, and we would do 7 drafts of every chapter. Until it got to a point where he would just cut out all the things he thought weren't important. I would put them back in the thing. But then I had to think really carefully about like, okay, he's right. This can't be 25 pages. Like, how could it be 5? And so we would go back and forth on that. So that's how we work together. He's a great editor.
That also explains why there were so much good like legalese documents as well. Because that's something that Kyle and I have talked about and talk about kind of all the time, is that like usually the breakdown that happens between like a creative and an organization is that there isn't clear boundaries, there isn't a clear contract, and then you get deep enough into it that that conversation gets more and more challenging to have, and people get frustrated, and it's hard sometimes, especially if it's, you know, an organization that you feel very like excited to be a part of, but there's something happening that's like creating a friction, and you're like, I don't know if I'm allowed to have a voice here, because like I'm just the artist and I don't want to step on any toes with this organization, or create a situation where they don't want to work with me again, or they, you know, tell other people not to work with me or whatever.
Yeah. So that's why we were trying to break it down into normal human language, so that it was really understandable. And I mean, one of the reasons why we did those parts too, and there's so many other things that I wish we could put in there too, but we did those parts so that you could also have an excuse and say, well, I have this book and it tells me that I'm supposed to do, you know, it's like being in a class, or being and saying, my professor told me I have to call, you know, a gallery and ask them questions, or you can use your an outside force as being the excuse to have to ask for something. So we're like, oh, if we put this stuff down, then people could say there was a source they got it from that was not themselves. But we wanted to put all that stuff online so it would be really easily accessible and you could edit, but no lawyer will actually allow you to do that unless you're LegalZoom or Rocket Lawyer, which, by the way, I'm not recommending those places I just mentioned. I'm just using them as examples. Because what they're meant to make you think about, what do I want to communicate about? What do I need to make formal? And then you make your own contracts based on the things that are important to you. Because if we just put it online and someone just copied it, it's probably not going to be applicable to every person. You have to change it, and you have to be like, oh, I make prints. I don't make an installation, or I make ephemeral work that's going to fall apart. So clearly I have to change a lot of these points. And we don't want to get sued because somebody just used our thing and then they get in trouble.
Yeah. And they're like, well, it wasn't my fault. It's their fault. Yeah, fair enough.
No, thank you.
You want to be used as an excuse to some extent, but not if you do it wrong.
We don't want to be the exclusive excuse.
No.
Like, those resources are so invaluable. Like, when Chrissy and I went to art school, like, there was no handbook. There's no like, here's a document, there's no even example of, here is a standard contract with a gallery, or here are some of those pitfalls that you're going to experience in your career. Here's some resources to help you along the way. But I feel like other professions kind of get that. Like graphic design, there's like a book at the end that's the graphic design book that's like, here's how you can price out some of these jobs. But I found, like, when we were in art school and from running residency and talking to a lot of artists don't get that kind of business education that comes along with having to be an artist. And contracts are so important. They're super important, and they're like not anything that we normally do. We make visual art. We don't write contracts.
Yeah, exactly. And you're not expected to. So, and cobbling together from all different resources is hard. So it's good to have a nice backbone to use and then make you think about, well, what's missing from this that I do need to, and then you can add it in. I'm always looking for the one that you can just copy, like where are the things you can just copy, and they really don't exist. They don't. Everyone, that's what every artist asks all the time, like, where's the resource where I can just copy the thing? And it's like, well, there is work that goes into it, but once you do it the first time, then you have that to use into the future, just like doing an invoice, your first invoice. It's like, what do
Exactly.
you actually put on that? And then once you have it, you've got it. So it's just a little upfront work and then you're good.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a little bit less of like trying to find a copy and pastable contract, but more so trying to teach and educate people, like, here's how you build a contract and how you build it correctly. Here's some examples. We can borrow from these things.
Yeah. Or like, here are some, like, I feel like you both did a really good job at sort of showing, here are some red flags. And here's how you can try to help yourself avoid them, or at least like address them head on, so that everybody knows they exist and you can all do your best to, you know, work within them or avoid them if possible. You know, I feel like that happened. I do a lot of murals, and, you know, the first mural I didn't know what the hell I was doing, and I made a lot of mistakes. And now I'm like, okay, you know, I know now that if it's certain surface areas, I have to ask for an inspection, and I need to have it in writing that that happened. And if we're working with an outside contractor to prep a surface, I need to be in communication with them to know what materials they're using, so the materials I use match and, you know, work well together. Yeah, all of those different things. You just have to be really mindful. And I think a lot of it is also being okay with showing that you maybe aren't totally sure, and that you know, want to ask a question, and not feeling scared to do that.
Yeah, I guess all the stuff that I've done in my career, or the majority of it, at least in the last 10 years, has been about that, like trying to help people have the vocabulary and the confidence to be able to ask questions, which is such a low bar, right, guys? Like, it's just sort of like, I feel like it's unfortunate that we have to spend so much time on that. But this sort of the power dynamic has been set up, and tell me if Canada's different, but the power dynamic has been set up so that artists don't feel like they necessarily have the bargaining power to ask anything, or like what you were saying before, like, I don't want to be seen as difficult, so I need to be really easy to work with, so that people will want to work with me, and there are only so many opportunities, so I need to make this one the best possible situation. I need to charge the lowest price and be the quietest and whatever. And those things don't necessarily get you a long-term career, actually. And speaking up is the only way that any of this stuff is going to change. So I'm hoping that with resources like artwork and many other people like contributing to this field also, that hopefully artists will see enough people saying the same thing that they feel confident enough to know, to also internalize the fact that without art, there is no art world, right? Like,
Yeah.
so, and you're the ones who are holding that key. So you have a lot more power than you think you do.
No, I think that I did a mural project with a city. So I was dealing with a lot of like city officials, and one of the city officials at the like launch or opening of the project was like, "You are such a pleasure to work with." Like, you know, we were kind of nervous working with an artist, because sometimes artists, like, you know, they're really like, they have their plan and they get really fussy and they're like kind of difficult to work with. And I was like, well, I guess that's a way to work, like, look at it. But also, like, if at your job, if you're working, you know, and you're focused on something that you've trained in and you've spent a lot of time getting really good at, and you present that to maybe people that aren't in that field and don't know what you know, and they're like, make these changes, do this or that, and you're like, that's just functionally not possible, because I know what I'm doing. Like, that would be frustrating for you. You work with the city. I'm sure you constantly have like residents telling you to do things that, you know, just aren't really doable based on budget or infrastructure or whatever. And it's probably really aggravating to you when they're like, oh, the city never does what they're supposed to do. When you're like, we are doing what we're supposed to do. I was like, it's the same with artists. Like, they may seem like they're coming across challenging, but they're actually just saying, like, I know that this material isn't going to work. I can't work at this time of day. I can't accomplish this within that time frame or this budget or whatever. They're not trying to be difficult. They're trying to explain, what they know about their job and the boundaries that they have within that sphere. And it's not about being challenging. It's about trying to make sure they give you the best that they can give you.
Right. I guess that's a big topic, that just valuing artists and respecting them as professionals is also, again, a low bar that we're all working toward having. I mean, the stereotypes are strong, like artists are bad with money, artists are disorganized. And so coming into a situation, I think artists do have this a hard, I guess, road to hoe, whatever the term would be, where you sort of have to prove to people up front that you can be good with money, because a lot of artists are very, very good with money, actually, because you have to be, and that you are super professional. But being professional is about like that material is wrong or that whatever. It's just a different language than other people are used to dealing with. So yes, the stereotypes are a big issue. But I also think like a lot of the professional practice stuff, it's helping people go into a situation with confidence. So I think some of that, like, oh, that artist was so difficult to work with, it actually happens because the artist goes into a situation thinking, oh no, I don't have any power, I'm not going to ask for anything. And then they're given a really bad circumstance or like a bad set of whatever. Then they see they actually can't work with that. Then they have to say, I need X, Y, and Z. When if at the beginning they were just confident in saying, hey, I just want to make sure I need X, Y, and Z. You're going to have that ready for me. And then if the person has that ready, then the person's actually really easy to deal with. It's like, it's kind of like being able to say what you need up front also, because I think a lot of us, and this has nothing to do with being an artist, it's like, it's hard to say what you actually need up front to other people sometimes. Yeah. So it's a basic human problem too.
100%. 100%.
We're on a side on like that question. You teach a professional practices class.
I do.
How long have you been teaching that? Chrissy just taught one at OCAD.
Yeah. So I've been teaching it since a year or two after the book originally came out in 2009. So since like 2011. So like over 10 years. I took 1 year off, and then but I've been doing just one class a year, and it's great. I actually really love it. Because I feel like teaching students, I'm able to stay like up to date on stuff the kids like to do. So that makes me feel really good. And I've also watched, I don't know if you guys have seen this too in teaching, but I've also watched just the interest in certain things change. Like when I first started teaching, it was all about galleries. And I think you guys have talked about this on your podcast before, but there was an interest in, how do I get a gallery? How do I get a gallery? And I'd be like, no, there are so many other things you can do and so many other places to be and venues to pursue and all that kind of stuff. Or maybe you don't need a venue. Maybe you have to do something different. And now there are so few students interested in that, at least where I teach. And it's much more like, oh no, that's sort of an outdated mode of like distribution. Like they see it in a totally different way than I think historically artists have looked at galleries since at least the mid 20th century. So it's been fascinating to me.
With that, here's a bit of my hypothesis. So like the disinterest in young artists pursuing the gallery, it felt like when I was going through school and, being presented with how to be an artist, that going to the gallery circuit seemed like, unless you're an art star, like it's really tough. And so I think that I personally strayed away from that to do other things because I felt like getting into the gallery and getting represented was such like a hurdle to overcome that it was maybe easier, or maybe I felt it was easier to pursue other avenues, like grow social media and try to do direct sales through a website. And so I feel like I've avoided the art gallery because I feel like it's too hard to break into and there's too many barriers and too many mysteries. But like social media and running an e-commerce store, I can get behind that. I can do that. I feel like maybe this is the downfall, is that I feel like that feels safer than going after galleries.
I think it feels safer. Maybe not safer, but just more personally manageable. Like you're not giving over your success or your promotion or anything to somebody else. You're able to control it yourself, and you know how hard you're working on it. You're not, you're not wondering what's going on in that gallery when you're not there, and do they care about you, or they look. So the amount of anxiety also around that diminishes. But I also think that one of my theories is also that an elite collector base is not necessarily what most people are interested in anymore. That it's that's a very specific demographic, and especially if you're at a certain price point, and that's not necessarily the demographic that people want to connect with anymore. So it's kind of like, oh yeah, well, leave it to the people. Like of course, there's still going to be artists that are like, I want the art forum review. I want to see my work at auction someday. Like I want to see that kind of stuff. And then there are other artists who are like, ooh, that's gross. Like, I would rather like put my work in places where people aren't going to expect it, or they're going to appreciate it, or it's going to be in front of people who don't go to galleries and museums. And like, so, and there's just so many more people working in social practice too, where a gallery just doesn't make any sense anymore for a bunch of people. So, yeah, I think it's really interesting. Lots of theories.
I think it's really interesting as well. I worked in the commercial gallery, and I know you did as well. And I only did it for maybe close to 2 years directly out of undergrad. And before that, I had only worked in artist-run centers. And this is something that I actually don't know that much about in terms of the US, but artist-run centers are very common in Canada, and they're government funded, and they have we sort of have like a union called CARFAC, which we talk about on our channel a lot, that helps to stipulate basically you can't pay artists less than this for a solo show or an installation or a workshop or a talk or whatever when you're in these publicly funded institutions. And so working in an artist run center, it is a gallery, and they get written about a lot, so there is some prestige. There is a bit of that elitism sometimes, because they are still spaces that some folks don't feel very welcomed within, but they're more publicly minded, I think, than like a commercial gallery. And the shift from working in these public spaces that were really about giving voice to maybe marginalized artists or artists that didn't have traditionally saleable works, to them being in a commercial gallery, it was such an adjustment for me. And I realized that I actually don't feel very comfortable selling art in the way that I was expected to, that it left me feeling sort of weird about the commercial gallery side of the art world. And I haven't really actually given myself a chance to re-immerse myself in that space since then. And it was a lovely job and a lovely gallery. I have no complaints, but it was just, I realized a lot about what I really value about the arts, and the commercial art world didn't meet that in the way that I had expected.
Right. And I worked in commercial galleries for a long time, but my job was never sales. But of course, when you're in most galleries are tiny, and so you all have to sort of work on everything together. But sales was never my official job. I was able to rationalize it. It depends on the gallery you work in, and the atmosphere, the tenor, the personalities of the people involved, what is success? How are you measuring success? And I feel like for me, I was able to rationalize it for a long time because I knew the artists needed to pay their rent, and you know what I mean? So sales equal, everyone gets money. And so when you get money, that's good for you as an artist. And then you can put that money back into the work, or you can pay for childcare or whatever you need to pay for. And so I always felt like it was a worthy thing to sell, it was good to sell it. But I worked in different galleries. The one that I worked in for 15 years, that one I felt very comfortable with sales. I felt very comfortable with the personalities of everyone involved. I felt very comfortable with why we were all doing what we were doing. We were all on the same page. But I did have experiences with some other galleries or friends who worked in other places that it's a store in the end, right? So some places felt more like a store, and some places feel more like a supportive community environment where we're trying to support each other monetarily and in other ways. So it depends on that gallery. But I love when you said that the government supports the artist-run space, the artist. What did you call it?
Artist-run centers.
Artist-run centers.
Yeah.
Yes. And technically that is what happens with nonprofits in the US, but as you may know, the government is not as supportive of artist spaces as it could be. So we have a little bit more of a struggle with that.
It is, the arts and education, and for some reason hospitals always seem to be the ones that get the least amount of funding, and I just really don't understand that. But no, artist-run centers in Canada are fantastic, and if you ever do another revision, I would say reach out to some Canadian artist-run centers for your quotes, because I think that would be a beautiful addition to this. I know that it's it's still in North America.
Yes.
How do you do this? How do you make it so that your words get put onto a page and bound so beautifully and get distributed?
So it's a little bit of hard work and a little bit of luck, I think. So it was, so as I said, Jonathan Melber was the co-author. We got together, we would have these conversations. We're like, oh, we should probably put this down on paper. And we were trying to think of different ways of communicating the information. And at the time, think back to 2007 when we first had these conversations. That's a long time ago. Social media was like not really a thing, except MySpace maybe and stuff. It was like really different. So that wasn't really an option. It's like, yeah, we should have a website, but like, who's going to look at that? So we were like, oh, books. We read books. Like, so we thought books would be the best way of doing it. Things are really different now, but I'm really happy we did a book, because it does, like, art people, like visual people they like books too. Yes. So it worked out. So we wrote like a sample chapter and an outline of what we wanted to do. And then here's where the luck comes in we also decided there were some books out in the world that were on this topic, but we found them to be, or I found them as someone who had graduated with my MFA. When I got out into the world, I bought them and I tried to read them, and they were a little bit the ones that I found were a little bit too specific. It was like specific to one person's journey. Mm. And I didn't like, it didn't resonate with me. Like the things that they were recommending, I was like, I'm not that kind of artist, or I'm not that kind of person, or that doesn't feel comfortable for me. So what we wanted to do, we set out to do, was not use our voices alone. We wanted at least 100 other people. And that was a random thing. We're like, 100 people is the right amount of people, because it sounded like a big enough number. We're like, we need to talk to 100 people. And when we talk to 100 people, then we'll be able to like synthesize the information and it wouldn't be from one voice anymore. So that was it was the impetus, but it was also an excuse, I will say, because for me also, I was struggling with some of the questions that are posed in this book. Like, how do you work with an artist? Like, what do you put in a contract? Like, and I was doing that day to day in my job and making stuff up also. So I was like, oh, this is also a really good excuse to talk to other gallerists and to talk to artists and and ask them point blank questions about their experience. So I will also see if I'm totally out of whack with what I'm thinking. And of course, those 100 people were a self-selecting group. I did have a couple of people say, no, why would I want to talk to you about that? Because I like it the way it is. Like, you're trying to flatten the power dynamic, or like to make this art world more transparent. Yeah, there were 2 people in particular that I remember saying, no, thank you, because of that reason. They were like, why would I want to change this? This is good for me. So I won't mention their names, but if anyone ever asks me, like, what do you think about so-and-so? I'm like, oh, let me tell you. If you ask me directly, I'll tell you. So anyway, so we decided to do that. So we started interviewing people, and then we're like, how do you write a book proposal? And Jonathan just happened to know someone who knew someone who knew someone who knew a book agent. So we were like, hey, book agent, can you just tell us how you get a book agent? Like we were just like, it was really actually quite innocent. Like we weren't angling. So I'm always recommending this too, like just asking questions and reaching out to your network and not being afraid to do that. And network meaning like your friends, like not some weird person that you're trying to extract information from. Like, it's like, hey, friend, do you know what to do about this? No. Do you have a friend who knows how to do it? Oh, can I talk to that person? And then just asking the question, and things happen. So for us, we did that. We went to the person was like, oh, I've got like 15 minutes, come meet me. And then we went and we showed our sample chapter. We showed our outline. we had our list of all the people we wanted to interview, like a working list. And the person just happened to have dated an artist and was like, my ex-boyfriend could have really used this. And then he said, how about I be your agent? So that's what happened. So, I mean, it was a lot of luck. Like that was luck. I mean, we had done work that we brought to this person. Actually, I'll give her credit. It's this one. She's a book agent named Mel Flashman. So we gave her the stuff, and then she said, "How about I do it?" And then she's the one who shops around. So when people talk to me about agents, and agents taking a percentage of sales, and by the way, no one goes into publishing a book to make all their money. By the way, it's not a profitable to do, but. Anyway, when they're like, oh, the agent will take my money and whatever, I'm like, well, if I didn't have an agent, this wouldn't have been published. So I'll be quite honest.
I felt that way working the commercial gallery too. As soon as I started working in a commercial gallery, I was like, I will never complain about a commission because this is work. Like I am hustling for these artists all of the time. Yeah.
And it's work. And we do have to recognize that like commissions they are there for a reason. And so this person hustled, and I don't know what she said behind closed doors to people to get Simon & Schuster to publish it. And then that's what happened. So I feel like any percentage that she gets and still continues to get if the book ever sells, and thank you guys, because there's obviously some people bought it recently. Like whatever she gets, I'm so happy because it never would have happened otherwise. So, but Jonathan and I make jokes all the time. So when we left her office and she said, how about I do it? We were like, wait, are you serious? We're like, oh, okay, great. Yeah, sure. That's great. And then we left and we're like, we're going to get hit by a bus and no one's ever going to know this happened. Like we were so careful. That walk home was like the most careful walk home I've ever had because I needed to tell people before I died. Yeah. And then now it's published. And then we were able to do a revision a few years back. And who knows if we'll do it again. I mean, what I really want is for someone younger than me to do the next version of this. So like somebody else who understands technology better, who like understands that kind of stuff. I want them to write the next version because people do say, are you going to update it? And I can think of 1,000 ways that I want to update it and a ton of different things I want to add, but I feel like it's time for someone else to do it.
Well, I think you both did a nice job of sort of acknowledging the time and place that it was written. And that, you're aware of the fact that there's going to be a moment where these platforms or even this language isn't going to be useful to people anymore. And I felt like you did that throughout, which was a very conscious and smart decision. Because it wasn't, we have a lot of books on our shelf that are, in a similar vein to this, and they don't do that. And even though that they must have been sort of cognizant of the fact that things were going to change, it's still funny to read it. Well, I got that silkscreen guide with the gasoline. What does it say?
Oh, it's just like, there's a silkscreen manual that we have that like explicitly tells you not to smoke your cigarettes while you're cleaning your screens out with gasoline. And you're like, that's clearly from a 60s era and not a 90s.
You're like, this didn't age well.
No, it didn't age well at all.
Perfect place and time. Yes. I mean, something I will say a publisher made us do, which we wouldn't have done. Like in our original outline, I had tons of web addresses, like resources for people to use, like all that stuff. And the publisher was like, get rid of every reference to a web address, get rid of so the original book had no mention of social media whatsoever, because we had originally written in about Facebook or something being this newfangled thing that people might catch on to. And they were like, we don't know if Facebook's going to last 2 more days. Like, get rid of it. So we did, they were smart in that, trying to make it a little more evergreen. But then we also added in like, while we're writing, the stock market's crashing or like whatever. We're like, we don't know if the apocalypse is happening in 6 months. Like, and the apocalypse did pretty much happen. So
so true.
Yeah.
So did this kind of feed into the art world learning, or I don't know, like where those came in conjunction with each other or the overlap there, but maybe we could talk a little bit about that project.
Sure. So this book project is sort of discrete. So did it with Jonathan, we revised it. That's that. And we're friends, and we don't do lots of other projects. Who knows what the future will hold. But someone else and I. So I've also noticed something about my career is that I always work with other people. I don't do solo things. So you guys might respond to that.
Yeah, you're duos.
Yeah.
Duos. I like duos. So another friend and I got together in about 2018, around a time that the revised edition had just come out. It was right after that. And started to think about, live engagements having to do like he's actually quoted in the book. It's Dexter Wimberly. So I interviewed him. We were friends from before. I knew his curatorial work and all of that. And he was like, "Hey, I'm thinking about doing a conference for like business and financial health for artists. And would you want to join me in doing this?" And I was like, "Oh, that's an interesting project. Like, what if we had a conference? Like, there aren't conferences for artists in the US. I don't know about in Canada, but there are lots of conferences for maybe nonprofit workers or museums, or there are conferences for different, or if you're a college art association, like there's like things like that. But there was nothing specifically for artists to talk that wasn't gated to talk about these topics. Like if you got a creative capital grant or something, then yes, you'll get professional development and you can go to their conference. But I think something like 9,000 people apply for a creative capital grant and like 50 people get it. So it's like a very gated process, and they do good things, but it's very gated. So we're like, how about an ungated, like anyone who wants to talk about this stuff can come. So in 2019, seems like 1,000 years ago. With all the stuff that's happened, we did a conference in New York that like 300 and something people came to, and we just talked about this stuff. We talked about money. We're like, let's talk about value and money, like shamelessly, like just and see what happens. And so it was a really fun experience. And then we're like, oh, maybe we should do that one more time. So we did it in Los Angeles in February of 2020. And so, that was the last time we did a big convening. And it was called Artwell Conference, which is a very descriptive name. And then COVID. So when COVID happened, we were like, oh, forget conferences. Will anyone ever do a conference again? Maybe, maybe not. So instead we were like, okay, let's change the concept a little bit. And I'll step back for 1 second. COVID hit. We were like, I can't do conferences. But we also thought, oh, there are lots of things we've always wanted to do, like live streaming. So that seemed like the future still in like 2019, early 2020. Like people Skyped, but it wasn't like that super common. So, and we had always said, like, what if we live streamed a conference? What if we had people joining from the internet and like watching? And then we're like, who would ever want to do that? No one's ever going to want to do it. But accessibility wise, we were kind of interested. We were also interested in like, what if we recorded stuff and then people could watch it later? And then we're like, who's going to do that? No one's ever going to do that. And then all of a sudden COVID. So we were like, okay, we're going to do webinars, which we had never really done. We had never done before. So we started doing these webinars that were more emergency related. So they were like, cancel rent was one of them, specifically for New York people who were very housing insecure, which is super sad. Healthcare related. They were all topics that we were very interested in always, but they never floated to the top of like what should be our next topic. But all of a sudden that floated to the top, and the financial stuff. Like if you don't have savings and it's COVID and all your shows, all your jobs, everything just got canceled, what now? Like those kind of emergency webinars. And they were very well attended because everyone was so freaked out. You might remember back 2 years. And people are still freaked out, but then it was really intense. And so we were like, all right, we have to do something different. And we have to have this material available all the time. Like this can't just be a one webinar. Like, can we figure out a way to like, let's record it, but in a way that's not just recording a Zoom. Like, let's figure out a way that this would be more attractive to schools. Because we also realized that with doing the conference, it was super fun. We had great conversations. People left energized. We hope that we were like chipping away at this like inability to talk about value and money, and like what's the difference between the two, and how do we define value. So it's great but our demographics were like mid to late 20s to like 50s in general, but more like 30s was like a big group. And there were some people who were 70 and above, and there were some people who were lower than 25, but the majority was like, let's say 30s, late 20s to early 40s. And we're like, oh, guess what? That's too late. Like someone coming because they haven't had healthcare ever and they're 40, that's too late. And we're like, or someone who doesn't have a penny in savings and they're 35 or 40 or 45, like that's too late. So we wanted to make something that schools would be able to use, so that we're not saying like a 20-year-old or an 18-year-old is going to be like, I'm going to start my own like 401k or I need to start thinking. I know that's not going to happen, right? But if they know that they can do that, even when they're 18, 19 years old, or you're like, ooh, that's something I got to think about at some point. Or even an 18, 19-year-old that's not paying their taxes yet because their parents still do tax, they still, put them on their taxes, or they don't yet have to, this is again, very American, they don't yet have healthcare themselves because they're still on their parents. Like at least they know that, oh, there's a resource about that. And it's speaking to artists, and they understand that my like cash flow might not be even. I have something to look at in the future, or I know the vocabulary of that. I'm not going to deal with it right now because it seems really like not important, but at least I know the vocabulary and I've got a foundation so that in 5 years or so, like hopefully they run into enough roadblocks or something that they're like, oh gosh, this is familiar to me. And that they don't run away from it. They run toward fixing it. So anyway, so that's what happened. So Art World Learning was born from that, which by the way, we have to rebrand it. And that's a whole other story. So it's going to have a different name at some point, but right now it's called Art World Learning. And we've been trying to get subscriptions, which we have. About 30 schools, institutions are subscribed to give it for free to their constituencies, so their cohort, whatever that might be, whether it's students or alums or people in the community or faculty or whatever. And we're trying to get more and more like nonprofits to subscribe to give it for free, because we need to pay for making the videos and doing all of that. So we're trying to figure out a business model. So we're talking about business models, trying to figure out a business model that would make it free to the people who need it, but through larger organizations. So now we're trying, like a New England Foundation for the Arts, for instance, in the US is now giving it to people who apply for their grants. So
that's awesome.
We have no one in Canada has subscribed yet, but because we don't have specifically Canadian content yet, but maybe we will. And some of it is some of it's applicable regardless of where you are, but healthcare in particular and taxes, those are not applicable to you guys.
Oh, like you're talking about retirement. I just redid we have a project planner that like helps you as an artist figure out your finances. And retirement is like one of those items that like you don't get a retirement as an artist. You have to plan for that. And nobody plans for that. No one does. And it's crazy. Like I did some of the math on it, and like, they're saying like put away like 20% of all your paychecks for retirement. And you're like, wait, like my art project that I struggle to get, that I feel embarrassed to ask for more money, that I'm being underpaid already for, I have to put 20% of that away to something else, and I have to pay taxes on top of that. Great.
As far as retirement goes, so this is the kind of thing we're trying to tackle. It's like, you don't have to put away 20%. You have to put away something, like just something. And so we try to do that. We did a couple math videos just to show, because a lot of artists, although again, I will repeat, they're actually really good with money, because when you have to make an art project and live your life and you have to figure out where the money's coming from to do all these things. And you have to be pretty intentional about where your money's going. But if you do the math, but no one really wants to do like, what does compound interest look like? Usually it's not like a fun pastime. So we did a video on
he loves it.
Like you love compound interest. So we did a 10-minute video that's on like, how do you calculate compound interest? And it shows you how money, like if you're putting it into a savings account that's got compound interest, if you start today with a teeny amount of money, don't wait 10 years for the 20%. Start today with a teeny amount. And if your compound interest works for you, right? So you'll see the difference in 20 years or 30 years or 40 years. It makes a massive difference if you started with just a little. Like if everyone started when they were 20 years old, imagine every artist just like a $5 a week. It's like, But I know when you don't have $5 a week, that seems insurmountable, right? Impossible. But that needs to be a priority for artists.
I think it's like, to help make it a priority for artists, it's helping to frame young artists who are going through school or not going through school and approaching the industry in a different manner, that like, you are a business. And as a business they set aside things for healthcare. They set aside things for taxes, your income taxes. They set aside money for retirement. And understanding that as an artist, you are a business, you're a sole proprietor, and you have to do these things that a normal business would do, so that when you are 70, you can potentially retire or, work part-time and kind of wind down a little bit from what is probably a 60-hour work week, because that's an unsustainable lifestyle for 70 years or whatever.
Yeah. And I think the pushback people give, the artists give, is like, well, I'm never going to stop being an artist. It's like, oh, that's true. You will never stop being an artist. You'll be an artist till the day you die, but your body doesn't necessarily, it won't be the same the whole time. Yeah. And so you have to sort of plan for those things. Like, we all live in bodies, and that's really hard.
Well, the pandemic really made it clear that like, you have to plan for savings. You can't just live paycheck to paycheck, because a global pandemic that shuts down everything for 2 years. Like, 2 years is a long time to like have a savings plan. That like, everyone experienced that, but like even a couple of months, because you never know what might happen to you, right?
Yeah. And I think people did in like 3 months, they sort of got their footing and like started to figure out like what the future was going to bring, or like or people got out of their houses again, at the very least, or they figured out things online that were working for them. So, but yeah, having that 3 months would have like, I mean, it was already so stressful, right? We know how incredibly stressful it was. And just adding those layers of stress was just too much. It was too much for us. So anyway, Art World Learning exists now.
All right. So let's do art shares. Let's do it.
Okay, great.
We don't have any, so it's all on you.
Oh,
our share was this wonderful book that you produced and all of the tabs.
Thank you for sharing. And because you just shared a book, I'm going to share a book also. Because an author who I really like, that I think artists might like. Do you know this book? Is it backwards?
I don't know this book. No, it's not backwards.
It's called Art Thinking by Amy Whitaker. She teaches at NYU. She's an amazing human, an amazing thinker. She's an artist. She also has an MBA. She also wrote another book, but this only counts as one thing. This one's called Economics of Visual Art, and it just came out last year. And for anyone who likes doing compound interest, Kyle, like this might be a book for you. But it's about like, why artists should care about economics is more like it. Like, what are the principles of economics that could work for you? And she's not like a super, yay, capitalism. It's like, how do we deal with the capitalist structure? And
that's always the hard part, right? Like we take a lot of heat for talking about money a lot, because people are like, artists should make art because they love it and the world should love art, and we don't like capitalism. I'm like, we still have to eat and pay for our house, and
we still have credit cards, and we still have debt. A lot of people have debt from school. There's a lot of stuff that needs to be dealt with. And so she sort of thinks about this, but this whole book is, I think, really inspirational, because she also talks about how for other professions, the reason we have to talk about this stuff is for other professions, a lot of times there is a point A that we're starting in, and there's a point B that you're looking toward. Like, if you want to be a doctor, you have to check these boxes and you get to your point B, right? With an artist, you're always inventing point B. Like, that's what we do in the world as artists, is we invent the next world. Like, that's exactly what we're doing. We're innovators and creatives, and we have to invent point B. And so if it's hard to make a budget for a point B world that doesn't exist.
Yeah.
So she talks about all these different ways of like thinking about that and giving yourself like grace and generosity to make mistakes and have time to think things through. Okay.
That sounds awesome. I love that.
Number 2 is the artist who made this painting behind me. Her name is Mary Temple. It's huge, and it's painted right on the wall, and she paints, it's not the best lighting. She might actually be mad that I'm doing this, but, and she has just, she paints light in spaces that have no light. So I'm in a room right now that has no window. So, and I worked with her for many years at Mixed Screens. And so when I moved into this apartment, this room has no window. And I was like, Mary, can you make me light in this window? So she painted this, and it's beautiful. And in her mind, the painting is not that paint on the wall. It's the moment someone walks into this room, and for one split second, they think there's a window in the room.
I love that.
Like,
that's so lovely.
And she's amazing. And people always see this in my Zooms, but I never get to talk about it. So thank you for talking about it.
Thank you
letting
for
me
sharing it.
And then the last thing that I recommend is I just watched the Andy Warhol Diaries, and I thought it was really fascinating and really sad.
Okay, I was like heartbroken by it. And the AI talking, like, what?
It was good. The whole series was fantastic. It was like utterly. I like that it was a perspective on Andy Warhol that I hadn't quite seen before, and it felt like a more real perspective, not just like here's Andy Warhol, here's a pedestal, put him up there, great. Like it was a really great documentary.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I thought it showed vulnerability and all the insecurity, and just to know that someone who's so part of art history and like just to see the insecurity, that was what was so heartbreaking. And his relationship to HIV and AIDS, which was also super heartbreaking. Like all of it was just, new and different. And and I enjoyed it. I thought I knew things about him, and I just learned a lot. Yep.
Yeah, I felt the exact same way. And I listened to it sometimes with earphones and sometimes on my computer. And when I was listening to it with headphones on, it was even more like just, you were so immersed in the like sincerity of that diary writing. And yeah, like you were saying, like hearing his side of how he was being received by people, even like his friend group, like it was heart-wrenching at times, but also real. Like it just felt really real, which I loved.
Yeah.
Ah, so beautiful.
I recommend all three.
Thank you
so
guys
much for letting me talk about that. Yeah.
Thank you so much for coming and joining us. I'm so glad that I got your book and that I put it out on the internet and I got to share it with so many people. And then you were, open and receptive to coming and chatting with us. Like it means the world to us to be able to talk with you. And yeah.
And I love what you guys do. And thank you for doing what you do, because you're putting a lot of like good vibes into the world that are really beautiful. So it was a pleasure to talk to you.
Wonderful chatting with you.
Have a great rest of your day.
You too.
Okay. Bye.